Everyone on the snowy street slowed to a stop the moment the German Shepherd began to growl. It was broad daylight, winter sun reflecting off fresh snow, turning the city bright and silent. A Navy SEAL stood frozen beside a bus stop, dressed head to toe in digital camouflage, his posture calm, but his eyes sharp. At his side, the German Shepherd's muscles tensed, not barking, not lunging, just staring, locked onto a single target. Across the street stood a dark SUV, engine idling, windows tinted. And then the dog did something no one expected. He stepped forward, not toward the car, toward the Navy SEAL. He pressed his body against the man's legs, low and protective, as if shielding the only person he trusted. "Easy, boy," the SEAL whispered, hand tightening on the leash. That's when the man in the SUV opened his door. A voice cut through the cold air. "That dog doesn't belong to you." People nearby stopped walking. A woman pulled her child closer. Someone whispered, "What's going on?" The German Shepherd didn't growl, didn't retreat. He leaned harder into the SEAL, eyes burning with fear and recognition. Why would a starving dog protect a man he had never met? Why was someone trying to reclaim him in broad daylight? And what happened to this German Shepherd during the year he vanished in the winter? Because what the Navy SEAL was about to uncover would expose a hidden world of cruelty, betrayal, and a bond so strong it survived hunger, pain, and the coldest winter imaginable. Stay with us. This story will change how you see loyalty forever. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe. And I'm curious, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Minneapolis, Minnesota looked deceptively peaceful beneath the winter sun. Snow lay thick across the city like finely ground salt, coating sidewalks, bus stops, and parked cars in a blinding white that reflected light back into the sky. The cold was sharp and dry, the kind that crept through gloves and into bone, reminding everyone that this city did not forgive weakness in winter. Breath turned visible the moment it left the mouth, drifting upward in pale clouds before vanishing. It was beautiful, yes, but only to those who could afford warmth. For everyone else, winter here was something to survive. Ethan Walker moved through the brightness like a shadow that refused to fade. He was in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the unmistakable posture of someone who had spent years being trained not to slouch, not to hesitate, not to break. His face was angular, defined by a squared jaw and a faint scar along the right cheekbone, a souvenir from a life he no longer spoke about. A short, disciplined beard framed his mouth, more out of habit than style, and his eyes carried a steady, watchful calm that rarely softened. People who passed him sometimes felt it without knowing why. This was a man who noticed everything. He wore the same thing he wore every day, regardless of weather or occasion, a Navy working uniform, digital camouflage flowing continuously across his jacket, chest, pocket flaps, and sleeves with no solid fabric breaking the pattern. The uniform was clean, pressed, and worn with quiet respect, not nostalgia. Ethan didn't dress this way to be seen. He dressed this way because it reminded him who he was when everything else felt uncertain. At his side walked Max. Max was a German Shepherd with a traditional black and tan coat, thick and well-kept despite the cold. He was 4 years old, large but not oversized, with a powerful chest and long, confident stride. His ears stood alert, catching sounds long before they reached human awareness, and his amber-brown eyes missed very little. Max moved with controlled energy, never pulling, never lagging, always aligned with Ethan's pace, as if the two shared an unspoken rhythm. To strangers, Max looked imposing. To Ethan, he was steady warmth in a world that had grown colder than it should have been. Ethan worked nights as a private security guard for a commercial complex near the river. It wasn't glamorous, and it paid far less than what he once earned, but it kept his mind occupied and his body moving. When the shift ended just after dawn, he and Max always took the longer route home. It was quieter then, the city still half asleep, wrapped in snow and silence. They were halfway down Hennepin Avenue when Max slowed, not stopped, slowed. Ethan felt it immediately, the subtle change in tension at the leash, the shift in Max's shoulders, the way his breathing changed from relaxed to deliberate. Ethan followed Max's gaze toward a bus stop ahead, its glass walls fogged slightly from trapped cold air and melting frost. Snow had piled around its base, uneven and untouched, except for a few footprints that led nowhere. "Easy," Ethan murmured, though Max hadn't moved forward. Under the shelter, curled tightly against the metal bench, was another dog. It was a German Shepherd too, but that was where the similarities ended. This one was thin. Too thin. Its black and tan coat was dull and matted, clinging to a body that looked smaller than it should have been. Its ribs were faintly visible beneath the fur, rising and falling too quickly with each shallow breath. One ear drooped awkwardly, and its paws were drawn close to its chest as if trying to preserve what little warmth remained. The dog trembled not from fear alone, but from exhaustion and cold. Ethan knelt slowly, careful not to startle it. The dog lifted its head just enough for dull, sunken eyes to meet his. There was no growl, no bark, just a quiet, broken awareness, like something that had learned long ago that noise did not bring help. "Hey there," Ethan said softly. His voice carried the same calm he used with Max, the same tone that had once steadied men in far worse places than this bus stop. Max stepped closer, careful and alert, positioning himself slightly in front of Ethan without being told. His body wasn't aggressive, but it was ready, protective. That was when Ethan noticed the mark around the stray dog's neck. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shadow in the fur. Then he saw it clearly, a faint abrasion, circular, uneven, a scar left by something tight, rope maybe, cable. Not a collar. Ethan's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Dogs didn't get marks like that by accident. As he reached out, something metallic caught the light beneath the dog's fur. Ethan's fingers closed around it gently, drawing out a small, worn piece of metal tangled in the remnants of a frayed collar. It was cold to the touch, heavier than it looked, and scratched along the edges as if it had been torn free. On its surface was a number, etched, not stamped, military style, familiar in a way that made Ethan's stomach tighten. Before he could study it further, Max let out a low growl. It wasn't directed at the stray dog. Ethan looked up. At the far end of the street, where the snow-covered road curved slightly out of sight, a dark SUV sat idling. No headlights, no hazard lights, just a silhouette against the brightness, its windows tinted too deeply to see inside. It hadn't been there moments ago. Ethan was certain of that. Max stepped forward, placing himself between Ethan and the street, his growl deepening, not loud but deliberate, a warning. Ethan rose slowly to his feet, metal still clenched in his hand, eyes fixed on the vehicle. He felt it then, the old instinct stirring awake, the sense that something unseen had just noticed him noticing it. The SUV remained still. The stray dog whimpered softly behind them, and in that moment, under the brilliant winter sun and unforgiving cold, Ethan Walker understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever had happened to this dog had not ended here, and whoever left it at this bus stop had not gone far. Morning in Minneapolis did not soften winter, it exposed it. The sun rose high and sharp, bouncing off layers of fresh snow until the entire city seemed to glow, streets and rooftops washed in blinding white. The cold was still brutal, but daylight made it feel honest, stripping away shadows and leaving nowhere for secrets to hide. Or so it seemed. Ethan Walker walked with steady purpose, Max tight at his side, the leash firm in his gloved hand. The rescued German Shepherd followed a few steps behind them, moving stiffly, each paw placement cautious as if the ground itself could turn hostile at any moment. The dog was larger up close than Ethan had first realized, likely a male, young, no more than 3 years old, but starvation had stolen his strength, hollowing his flanks and dulling the proud lines of his breed. His coat, once a rich black and tan, was faded and uneven, clumped where ice and grime had fused together. His eyes stayed low, flicking up only when Ethan spoke, searching for tone rather than words. The veterinary clinic sat on a quiet corner street, its brick facade half buried by plowed snowbanks. Inside, warmth rushed out the moment Ethan pushed the door open, carrying the clean, sharp scent of antiseptic and animal fur. The stray hesitated at the threshold, nails clicking softly against the tile, body tense as if expecting punishment for crossing it. Max paused, turned, and gave a single calm huff, not a command, not a warning, but reassurance. The stray followed. Behind the front desk stood a woman in her early 40s, tall and slim, with ash blonde hair pulled into a low, practical ponytail. Her skin was pale with a hint of winter dryness at the knuckles, and faint lines around her eyes suggested someone who smiled often but slept lightly. This was Sarah Miller, the clinic's senior veterinarian. She wore navy scrubs under a white coat that had seen better days, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal strong forearms marked by old scratches, the quiet evidence of years spent earning animals' trust. Her eyes, a soft gray-green, sharpened the moment she saw the condition of the rescued dog. "Easy," she said gently, voice steady and warm. "You're safe here." The dog didn't respond, but he stopped trembling. That was enough for Sarah. She crouched slowly, keeping her movements open and deliberate, letting the dog see her hands before she touched him. Ethan noticed how naturally she did it, how confidence and compassion blended without force. "He hasn't eaten properly in a long time," she said after a brief examination, fingers pressing lightly along the dog's ribs, spine, and shoulders. "Severe calorie deficit, dehydration too. And," she leaned closer to the neck, parting the fur carefully, "there's trauma here, not from a collar." She straightened and held up what she had found, a thin metallic cable strand, barely visible unless you knew where to look. It was embedded just enough to snag fur, not deep enough to cut skin, but unmistakable in its purpose. "This kind of cable is used for pulling cages," Sarah said quietly, "or restraining them when they fight." Ethan's jaw tightened. Max stepped closer, positioning himself between Ethan and the examination table, eyes never leaving the door. He didn't growl. He didn't need to. "Can you help him?" Ethan asked. Sarah nodded without hesitation. "Yes, but I'll need to run scans, blood work, and he needs rest, a lot of it." As Sarah guided the stray toward an exam room, a young nurse emerged from the hallway. She couldn't have been more than 25, petite, dark-haired, her bangs uneven as if trimmed in a hurry. Her name tag read, Emily. Her eyes were wide, and she held the phone as though it were something alive. "Dr. Miller," she whispered urgently, "there was a call, just now." Sarah turned. "From who?" "They wouldn't say," Emily replied, swallowing, "but they asked very specific questions about a German shepherd, male, black and tan, brought in this morning." The air in the room shifted. Ethan felt it before Sarah spoke. The weight of being observed counted. "What kind of questions?" Sarah asked. Emily hesitated. How thin he was, whether he was limping, if he had marks on his neck. Max's ears snapped forward. Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket and stepped aside, dialing a number he hadn't called in over a year. It rang twice. "Thompson," a man's voice answered, low and gravelly. "Mike," Ethan said. "It's Ethan Walker." There was a pause, a breath drawn sharp. "I was wondering when you'd disappear again," Mike Thompson replied. "What's wrong?" Mike Thompson was in his late 40s, broad and heavy-set, with a permanent crease between his eyebrows that years on the force had carved there. His hair was more gray than brown now, kept short, his beard thick and uneven from neglect rather than fashion. He had been a detective for over 20 years before leaving the department after a case went bad, one that involved corruption he refused to ignore. It hadn't broken his sense of justice, but it had stripped away his trust. "I need you to look into something," Ethan said, quietly. "I'm listening." When Ethan ended the call, the nurse was still standing there, pale and shaken. Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Emily," she said calmly, "did they call back?" "No," Emily whispered, "but they knew we'd help him." Sarah's expression hardened, not with fear, but resolve. "I'll pull the exterior camera footage," she said. Minutes later, they stood around a small monitor behind the desk. The image was clear, the sun glaring off the snow outside. A man stood across the street from the clinic, tall, wrapped in a heavy dark coat. A knit cap shadowed his face, but his posture was unmistakable, rigid, impatient. He lifted his arm and pointed, directly at the exam room door where Max now sat guard, unmoving. No words were spoken, none were needed. Ethan exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the screen. "He knows where we are." Max let out a low, steady rumble. Not a threat, but a promise. Outside, the man lowered his arm and stepped back, disappearing into the glare of winter light as if swallowed by it. Inside, the rescued dog let out a soft whine, as though sensing that the danger which had once owned him was closer than ever. And Ethan Walker understood something else then, with chilling certainty. Daylight hadn't scared the hunter away. It had only given him a better view. The man on the screen never crossed the clinic's threshold. That was what unsettled Ethan most. He paced the sidewalk slowly, boots crunching through snow that glittered like crushed glass under the sun, circling the building with the patience of a predator that already knew where the prey was hiding. The camera followed him in fragments, shoulder here, profile there, but never his full face. He moved with intent, not curiosity. A hunter memorizing terrain. Ethan, Mike Thompson, and Sarah Miller stood shoulder to shoulder in the cramped security office behind the clinic's reception desk. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. The monitor hummed softly, replaying the footage on a loop. Each time the man appeared, Max's ears twitched from across the hall, his body tightening as if the image itself carried a scent. Mike leaned closer to the screen, arms crossed over his thick chest. Up close, his years showed more clearly. The heavy beard shadowed his jaw, streaked with gray, and the skin around his eyes was weathered, hardened by decades of reading people who lied for a living. He had the posture of someone who never fully relaxed, even in supposedly safe rooms. Once a detective, always a detective. "See that?" Mike muttered, pointing. "He's not casing the clinic. He's checking exits, sight lines, blind spots." Ethan nodded. He'd noticed the same thing. The man paused near the alley, lingered by the corner where the snowbank rose highest, then drifted back toward the street as if pulled by an invisible leash. No panic, no rush. Just confidence. Sarah folded her arms, her expression tight. In the fluorescent light, her ash-blonde hair looked almost silver, the loose strands near her temples catching the glow. "I've seen owners act desperate," she said quietly. "This isn't desperation. This is possession." She clicked to another file on her tablet, bringing up still images she had taken during the examination. Close-ups of the rescued dog's muzzle filled the screen now. The camera didn't lie. Faint scars crisscrossed the skin beneath the fur, thin lines like pale thread stitched into flesh. Around the lips, the skin was tougher, less elastic, as if it had been forced open again and again. "Old scars," Sarah said, "healed improperly, and here—" She zoomed in further. "His canines. See the chipping? That doesn't happen from chewing toys or bones." Mike exhaled slowly through his nose. Forced bite training. Ethan's jaw clenched. His gaze drifted to the open exam room doorway where Max sat like a statue, broad shoulders squared, eyes fixed forward. Max's black and tan coat caught the light, every muscle visible beneath it. His eyes had changed since the footage started playing, harder now. Darker, not angry, aware. "He knows," Ethan said quietly. Sarah glanced at Max, then back at Ethan. Dogs like him pick up patterns fast, smells, movements, intent. "He knows this isn't random." She hesitated, then continued. "And the other dog, he's not just traumatized, he's conditioned." Mike straightened. "Meaning?" "Meaning someone spent time breaking him down and building him back up the wrong way," Sarah said. "Pain, restraint, starvation, that's how you turn fear into obedience." The room went quiet. Mike stepped back from the monitor and pulled out his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before he spoke again, voice lower now. "There's been talk," he said. "Nothing official. Whispers from guys still in the department who owe me favors. Underground dogfighting, not the sloppy kind you see busted on the news. This is organized, rotates locations. Targets large breeds, shepherds, Malinois, anything with muscle and drive." Ethan turned to him. "Police dogs?" Mike nodded grimly. "Especially them. They're valuable, trained, fearless. And if you can break one of those—" He shook his head. "You make a statement." Sarah's hand tightened around her tablet. "Then why leave this one at a bus stop?" "That's the part that doesn't fit," Mike said. "Unless he wasn't left." Ethan's eyes narrowed. He looked again at the still image of the man outside, frozen mid-step in the snow. Unless he escaped. As if summoned by the word, a soft sound drifted down the hall, a low, uncertain whine. Ethan moved first. He crossed into the exam room where the rescued dog lay curled on a padded mat, a heat lamp casting a gentle glow over his thin body. The dog lifted his head when Ethan entered, eyes flicking behind him toward the door, then back again. He didn't rise. He didn't retreat. He waited. Ethan knelt slowly, keeping his posture open. Up close, the dog looked younger than he'd first thought, maybe 2.5, 3 at most. His face still held the angular promise of maturity, but it had been dulled by hunger and fear. One ear bore a small notch, likely from an old tear that never healed cleanly. His breathing steadied when Ethan stopped moving. "You did this to get away," Ethan murmured, not expecting an answer. "Didn't you?" The dog's eyes didn't blink. They stayed locked on Ethan's face, searching, measuring. When Ethan reached out, the dog flinched, but didn't pull back. Progress, however small. Behind him, Max stood at the threshold, silent. His presence filled the room like a wall. The rescued dog glanced at him, then quickly looked away, submission clear in the dip of his head. He wasn't afraid of Max. He respected him. Ethan rose and stepped back into the office. Mike was still there, phone in hand now, scrolling through messages, his brow furrowed deeper with each swipe. "You okay?" Ethan asked. Mike didn't answer immediately. He stared at the screen, jaw tightening. Then his phone buzzed again, a sharp vibration that cut through the quiet. He read the message once, then again. Sarah noticed first. "What is it?" Mike looked up, his face drained of color. "That was fast." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Mike." Mike turned the phone so they could see. The message was short. No number attached, just words on a black screen. "Return the dog or pay the price." No punctuation, no threat spelled out. None was needed. Sarah covered her mouth with one hand. "They know." "They've known," Mike said grimly, "from the moment he limped into your clinic." Ethan didn't speak. His gaze went instinctively to Max. The shepherd met his eyes, unwavering. There was no fear there, only readiness. Outside, the sun continued to blaze against the snow, making the world look clean and harmless. Inside the clinic, something dark had just shown its teeth, and it was hungry. Noon sharpened Minneapolis into something almost unreal. The winter sun climbed high and hard, flooding the streets with light so intense it turned the snow into a blinding sheet of white glass. Shadows shortened, edges sharpened. Every sound, tires on ice, a door closing blocks away, seemed to carry farther than it should have. In daylight like this, danger didn't hide. It waited. Ethan Walker drove home with both hands steady on the wheel, Max seated upright in the back, alert but silent. The city slid past them in clean lines, brick storefronts, frozen river glimpses between buildings, snowbanks stacked higher than mailboxes. Anyone watching would have seen nothing unusual, a man heading home after a long morning, his dog riding patiently behind him. But Ethan felt the tension humming beneath his skin, a familiar pressure he hadn't felt since his last deployment. It wasn't fear. It was anticipation. His house sat on a quiet residential street, a modest, single-story place with pale siding and a narrow porch that faced the sun. Snow lay untouched across the yard except for the faint track of his tires. The moment Ethan cut the engine, Max was on his feet, ears pricked, gaze fixed on the street behind them. "Inside," Ethan said calmly. Max obeyed, but not before casting one last look over his shoulder. The warmth inside the house felt temporary, fragile. Sunlight poured through the windows, making the living room glow, but the brightness did nothing to ease the sense of intrusion. Ethan removed his jacket and set it carefully on the chair by the door, the digital camouflage pattern catching the light in fractured shapes. Max moved directly to the front window and sat, posture rigid, tail still, ears angled forward like antennae tuned to something Ethan couldn't hear. Ethan followed his gaze. A dark sedan rolled past the house, slow enough to be noticeable, fast enough to pretend it wasn't. Its windows were tinted deep, the driver invisible. The tires whispered over the packed snow, leaving faint tracks that curved down the street and vanished around the corner. Max didn't growl. He watched. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. "I see you too." He resisted the urge to step outside immediately. That instinct, to confront, to assert, had been trained into him for years, but he'd learned the cost of acting too fast. Instead, he moved through the house methodically, checking doors, windows, the back entry that led to a small fenced yard. Everything looked undisturbed, too undisturbed. Max's attention shifted suddenly. He rose and padded toward the back window, nose low, tail stiff. Ethan joined him and scanned the yard. That's when he saw the footprints. They cut through the snow along the fence line, heavy impressions pressed deep into the white. Large boots, wide soles. The steps were close together, hurried, as if whoever made them had been moving fast but trying not to be seen. The trail led toward the side gate, stopped abruptly, then doubled back toward the street. Ethan crouched studying them, fresh, made within the last hour. Someone had been here. He straightened and pulled out his phone, dialing before his thoughts could catch up. Mike Thompson answered on the third ring. "Tell me you're somewhere safe." "Home," Ethan said. "But I've got company." There was a pause, the sound of Mike shifting on the other end. "I ran the number on that metal tag," he said. "Not officially, through a friend of a friend." "And?" "It's tied to an inventory system that hasn't been active in years. Commercial freight, storage, there's an address." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Where?" "Industrial outskirts, north side. An old warehouse complex near the rail spur. One of the buildings caught fire about 5 years back. Partial collapse. The rest was condemned and forgotten." Forgotten things didn't usually send hunters. "Email me everything," Ethan said. "Floor plans if you can find them." "I'll try," Mike replied. "Ethan, this isn't random anymore. Whoever they are, they're organized. Careful." Ethan glanced back at the yard. They always are. He ended the call and stood there for a long moment, letting the house settle around him. Max returned to the front window, resuming his watch as if it were a duty he'd been assigned. The dog's reflection stared back from the glass, broad chest, strong neck, eyes dark with focus. Ethan felt a brief, fierce swell of gratitude. Max hadn't been trained for this life. He'd chosen it. Minutes passed. Then the crunch of footsteps sounded on the porch, not loud, not rushed. Just enough to be heard. Ethan moved without thinking, body aligning with memory. He stepped toward the door, hand hovering near the handle, senses narrowed to the space beyond the wood and glass. Max was there instantly, positioning himself half a step ahead, shoulders squared. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in. Ethan exhaled slowly and pulled the door open. The porch was empty. Sunlight spilled across the boards, highlighting drifting snowflakes shaken loose from the railing. The street lay quiet, innocent. For a split second, he wondered if he'd imagined it. Then Max lunged. He shot forward with explosive speed, teeth snapping down on something that had just hit the porch boards, a scrap of fabric tossed from somewhere out of sight. The movement was precise, controlled. Max landed, head up, jaws clenched around his prize. Ethan stared. It was a piece of digital camouflage fabric, torn, ragged along one edge, the pattern unmistakable, Navy working uniform. Ethan took it from Max slowly, fingers tightening as he felt the familiar texture. The tear wasn't clean. It had been ripped away by force. The fabric was dirty, damp at the edges, as if it had been dragged through snow. A message. Someone out there knew exactly who he was, knew what he wore, and wanted him to understand that this wasn't just about a dog anymore. Max stood close, body vibrating with restrained energy, eyes scanning the yard again as if daring whoever had thrown it to try something else. Ethan closed his hand around the fabric and looked out into the glare of the snow-covered street. The brightness felt mocking now, a cruel contrast to the darkness pressing in from all sides. "They're close," he said quietly, "and they're getting careless." Max didn't move. Neither did Ethan, because whatever waited at the end of those footprints, whatever burned-out warehouse held answers, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This had crossed a line, and he would not step back. Morning arrived quietly, snow drifting down in thin, patient lines that softened the edges of the industrial outskirts. Even here, far from the polished streets of downtown Minneapolis, daylight was relentless, bright enough to pierce the gray and expose every scar the city tried to forget. The warehouse complex rose ahead of them like a row of broken teeth, concrete and steel gnawed by time, fire, and neglect. Sunlight filtered through torn clouds and bounced off the snow, making the place look almost harmless from a distance. Almost. Ethan Walker parked the truck behind a rusted delivery bay and shut off the engine. He sat still for a moment, listening. The wind sighed through bent fencing. Somewhere, loose metal tapped in a steady rhythm. No voices, no engines. But the silence felt staged, like a held breath. Mike Thompson climbed out of the passenger side, pulling his coat tighter. Up close, the years in law enforcement showed even more clearly in him. His shoulders were heavy, posture slightly hunched not from age but from habit, always ready to brace, to lean into trouble. The deep lines at the corners of his mouth were set permanently downward, a mark left by too many crime scenes that ended without answers. He scanned the perimeter with a practiced eye, cataloging shadows and blind spots without comment. Max jumped down last, landing lightly despite the uneven ground. Snow clung to the black and tan fur along his legs, but it didn't slow him. His nose dropped immediately, drawing in scent after scent, tail low but steady. This place spoke to him in a language Ethan had learned to trust more than his own instincts. "Stay close," Ethan said, his voice low but calm. Max flicked an ear back in acknowledgement and moved forward. The main door of the warehouse hung crooked on its hinges, half melted along one edge where fire had once kissed it hard enough to warp steel. Inside, the cold was immediate and biting, sharper than outside, as if the building hoarded winter in its bones. Their breath fogged the air. Light streamed through broken windows high above, slicing the darkness into long, pale beams that stretched across the floor like prison bars. Every sound echoed, boots on concrete, the soft clink of Mike's belt buckle, Max's nails clicking faintly as he walked. The place smelled wrong, old smoke, rust, and beneath it all, something sour and stale that made the back of Ethan's throat tighten. Max slowed near the center of the warehouse, head snapping toward a section along the far wall where a heavy tarp had been draped over something large and uneven. The fabric was gray, stiff with frost, its edges weighed down by scrap metal and bricks. "That," Mike murmured. "That's not weather cover." Max tugged gently at the leash, then harder, urgency vibrating through his body. Ethan followed, heart rate ticking up with every step. He reached the tarp and pulled it aside. The sight beneath it punched the air from his lungs. Steel cages. 3 of them. Heavy gauge bars welded thick and crude. Chains lay coiled on the floor, some snapped, others worn smooth from repeated strain. The concrete beneath was scarred, deep gouges clawed into the surface, frantic arcs and lines that told a story no one wanted to imagine. Dark stains marked where blood had soaked in and dried again, layer upon layer. Mike swore under his breath, the words sounding small in the vast space. Max stood rigid, hackles lifting, a low growl vibrating from his chest. Not anger, recognition. Ethan crouched, running a gloved hand over one of the claw marks. "They fought to get out," he said quietly. "Every time." Mike turned away, jaw clenched so tight the muscle jumped beneath his beard. "This isn't backyard garbage," he said. "This is organized." Max moved again, nose working furiously now. He led them toward a narrow corridor along the side wall, partially collapsed from the old fire. At the end of it, a section of concrete looked wrong, too clean, too recently disturbed. Ethan pressed against it, and the panel shifted inward with a hollow sound. A hidden compartment. Inside were ledgers, notebooks stacked neatly despite the dust, their covers stained but intact. Ethan opened the first one carefully. Pages filled with tight handwriting greeted him. Dates, times, numbers, names written in shorthand. Amounts circled in red. "Matches," Mike breathed, leaning in. "Rounds. Bets." Ethan flipped another page and felt his stomach drop. A list of spectators, some initials, some full names. Enough to build a web. "This isn't just a ring," Mike said, his face pale now, the color drained from beneath his beard. "It's a network. Multiple locations, multiple handlers." Max whined softly, a sound pulled from deep in his chest. He backed away from the cages, eyes darting, ears swiveling. The air had changed. Ethan felt it too, a subtle pressure, the sense of being funneled. Then it happened. A metallic crash thundered behind them. The sound reverberated through the warehouse, slamming into walls and echoing back doubled and distorted. Ethan spun, heart slamming hard enough to rattle his ribs. The main door, where sunlight had spilled in moments ago, was now shut. A heavy steel bar slid into place with a grinding shriek that made Max bark once, sharp and sudden. Locked. Mike rushed forward, grabbing the handle, yanking hard. It didn't budge. He slammed his shoulder into it, pain flaring across his face, but the door held. "Someone's out there," he said, breath coming faster now. Ethan scanned the shadows, adrenaline sharpening his senses. The warehouse felt smaller suddenly. the long beams of sunlight turning into traps instead of guides. Max planted himself between them and the door, stance wide, teeth bared, not in panic, but warning. From somewhere beyond the steel, a muffled sound drifted in. Footsteps, slow, unhurried. Whoever had locked them in wasn't running. They were listening. Ethan didn't panic when the warehouse door slammed shut. Panic wasted air. He listened instead, to the echo of metal settling, to Max's breathing as it deepened and steadied, to the faint shuffle beyond the steel that confirmed someone was still there, still watching. Light cut the warehouse into pale corridors, and in one of those corridors, half hidden by a fallen beam, Ethan spotted it. A service door, ajar just enough to let winter's glare leak through. "Back," he whispered. Max understood immediately. He turned, nose low, moving with purpose through debris and shadow, guiding them toward the opening. Mike followed, boots scraping softly, one hand already at his phone. The air grew colder as they approached the door, the smell of snow and exhaust seeping in like a promise and a threat all at once. They slipped out into daylight. Snow exploded into brightness the moment they crossed the threshold, the kind of blinding white that made distance hard to judge. The warehouse loomed behind them, ugly and inert again, as if nothing had happened inside. Wind swept across the open yard, lifting loose flakes into brief spirals that vanished almost as quickly as they formed. "Move," Ethan said. They reached the truck in seconds. Max vaulted into the back seat. Ethan slammed the driver's door shut and turned the key. The engine caught. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of it idling and the rush of blood in his ears. Then Mike stiffened. "We've got company." A dark SUV rolled into view at the far end of the lot, tires crunching over ice, grille blacked out, windows tinted too deep to show faces. It paused, just long enough to be sure it had their attention, then surged forward. Ethan pulled out hard, the truck fishtailing briefly before traction caught. Snow sprayed behind them as they burst onto the access road. The city rose ahead in clean, cold lines, warehouses giving way to rail yards bleeding into industrial streets that hadn't seen a plow yet. The SUV stayed with them. Not close, not far. Patient. Ethan kept his speed steady, reading the road like a map etched into muscle memory. He didn't try to lose them yet. He wanted to know how they moved. The SUV matched every turn, every acceleration, its driver confident enough to mirror rather than chase. Mike had his phone to his ear. "Dispatch, this is..." He frowned, pulling it away, checking the screen. "Signal's breaking up." "Try again," Ethan said. Mike did. Static hissed, then a brief connection that dissolved into nothing. He swore softly. "They're jamming. Has to be." Ethan's mouth set into a thin line. That confirmed it. This wasn't a scare tactic. This was preparation. They cut onto a wider street where the sun reflected off packed snow like polished marble. Pedestrians hugged sidewalks, bundled and cautious. Ethan slowed just enough to blend, then turned sharply down a narrower side road. The SUV adjusted instantly, tires shrieking as it followed. Max stood in the back now, braced between seats, eyes locked on the rear window. His breathing was controlled, focused, not frantic. He was built for this moment, the tension, the movement, the unspoken command to hold the line. The truck skidded as Ethan took a corner too fast, correcting with a smooth countersteer that sent a wave of snow into the air. The SUV closed the gap. "Too tight," Mike warned. "I know," Ethan replied. He didn't look back. They burst onto a residential stretch, rows of small houses, cars parked tight along the curb, snowbanks narrowing the lanes. Ethan slowed again, letting the SUV think it had them. The move paid off. The SUV crept closer, confident now, predatory. Mike tried the phone one more time. "Nothing," he said. "They're blocking everything." "Then we don't wait for help," Ethan said. "We buy time." He veered suddenly into a grocery store lot, cut across empty parking spaces, then back onto the road through an exit meant for one-way traffic. Horns blared. The SUV followed anyway, reckless now, revealing its hand. The distance closed to a car length. Ethan could feel it, the pressure at his back, the calculation happening behind tinted glass. He focused on the road ahead, on the slight rise where sunlight hit ice differently, on the way the street curved near the old water tower. He'd driven these streets long enough to know where winter hid its traps. "Hold," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. The SUV edged closer, almost kissing the truck's bumper. Then a rear window slid down. Ethan glimpsed a figure inside, broad shoulders, heavy coat, a gloved hand extending outward. The man's face stayed hidden, but his posture was casual, mocking. Something flew. It hit the road between them, bounced once, then skidded, spinning toward the truck's rear tire. Ethan swerved just enough to avoid it. The object clattered against the snowbank and came to rest. Mike craned his neck. What the hell was that? Ethan didn't answer. He braked hard. The truck slid, stopped. The SUV surged past, then slowed, pulling ahead just far enough to make a point. Ethan threw the truck into park and jumped out, boots crunching. Max barked once, sharp and furious. The object lay in the snow. A collar, thick leather, reinforced, scarred from use. Attached to it was a small black module, angular, sealed, unmistakable. A GPS tracker, the kind used to follow assets that didn't get a choice. Ethan picked it up, the cold biting through his glove. The collar felt heavy with intent. Behind him, the SUV idled. A door didn't open. No one spoke. The message had been delivered. Max stood at Ethan's side, body rigid, a low growl vibrating through his chest. Not fear, defiance. Ethan looked up at the SUV, then back down at the collar. He understood now. They weren't just chasing, they were claiming, marking territory, warning him that wherever he went next, they intended to follow. He turned and walked back to the truck, collar still in his hand. As he climbed in, the SUV accelerated, disappearing around the bend, tires screaming against ice. The street fell quiet again. Snow drifted down, indifferent. Ethan sat there for a moment, breathing, listening to Max's steady presence behind him and Mike's tight silence beside him. He placed the collar carefully on the dashboard, where the sun caught the black casing and made it gleam. "They're not hiding anymore," Mike said finally. "No," Ethan replied. "They're counting on us to run." He started the engine and drove straight back into the light. Ethan chose the park because light exposes lies. By late afternoon, winter sunlight stretched long and low, turning the snow into sheets of gold that reflected up into faces and softened nothing. The Central Park lay open and alive. Families gliding on sleds, children wobbling on skates, couples walking shoulder to shoulder with gloved hands linked. Cameras stood like quiet sentinels at every entrance, black lenses fixed on the broad paths in the frozen pond. Noise here was not chaos, it was witness. Ethan parked near the curb where the road met the park's edge and cut the engine. He stayed seated a moment, breathing, letting his pulse settle into something usable. Mike Thompson shifted beside him, jaw set, eyes moving constantly. In daylight, Mike looked heavier somehow. Broad frame, wrapped in a dark coat, beard trimmed close but uneven, the lines in his face deeper when he frowned. Years of chasing truths that didn't want to be found had carved patience into him, but today there was a tightness around his mouth that hadn't been there before. This wasn't just a case anymore. It had crossed into something personal. Max stood in the back seat, posture tall, ears forward, reading the park as if it were a map. His black and tan coat caught the sun, each strand outlined, his eyes bright and focused. He wasn't excited. He was ready. "Once we step out," Ethan said quietly, "we don't rush anything." Mike nodded. Cameras first, crowd second. They stepped into the cold together. The brightness pressed in, honest and unforgiving. Children laughed somewhere near the pond. A vendor's bell chimed as cocoa was poured. The ordinary world moved on its axis, unaware of the line Ethan intended to draw through it. They walked toward the main path. Max took point without pulling, his presence drawing glances, admiring, cautious, curious. Ethan felt the weight of those eyes and welcomed it. Attention was protection here. Behind them, the dark SUV rolled in like a thought you can't shake. It stopped a short distance away, angled as if casual, engine idling. The driver stayed hidden. The passenger window remained closed. They were careful. They always were. Ethan stopped near a row of benches facing the frozen pond. Families clustered nearby, their laughter carrying. He bent and rested a hand on Max's neck, fingers sinking into warm fur. Max didn't look back. His gaze stayed forward, fixed. Minutes passed. The SUV didn't move. Mike shifted closer. "They won't do it with this many eyes." "Not yet," Ethan said. The passenger door of the SUV opened. A handler stepped out. Not the leader, Ethan knew that instantly, but muscle. The man was tall and lean, his movements sharp and economical. He wore a heavy jacket pulled tight, hood up, face half hidden. His hands were gloved. When he reached back into the vehicle, Ethan's stomach tightened. A dog emerged. It was a large dog, heavier than Max, with a dark brindled coat that swallowed the light, thick neck, scarred muzzle. The dog's ears were cropped short, old work done poorly. Its eyes were pale and restless, flicking between people, noise, motion. The handler kept a short leash, wrapped tight around his wrist. The dog strained, not with excitement, with confusion sharpened into aggression. It pulled toward sound, toward movement, toward anything that broke the stillness. Its breathing was fast, shallow, not trained calm, conditioned chaos. "Here we go," Mike muttered. The handler took 3 steps toward the path and loosened his grip. The leash dropped. The brindled dog surged forward, barking hard, a sound meant to fracture attention. Children screamed. A woman grabbed her son and pulled him back. Skates scraped ice. The handler didn't shout. He didn't need to. He'd released disorder like a weapon. Ethan moved immediately, placing himself between the oncoming threat and the nearest cluster of people. His hand stayed firm on Max's collar, not restraining, just anchoring. Max stepped forward into the space Ethan left open, body squared, tail low, eyes locked. The brindled dog skidded to a halt a few yards away, hackles raised, teeth bared. It snapped once, testing. Its stance was wrong, too forward, too rigid, driven by fear more than intent. Max didn't answer with noise. He stood. He lowered his head slightly, shoulders broad, chest open. A challenge without invitation. He didn't advance. He didn't retreat. He held the line. The crowd hushed, the sound dropping into a strange, brittle quiet broken only by the wind and the dog's breathing. Somewhere, a camera whirred as it adjusted focus. The brindled dog lunged. Max moved, not toward the dog, but sideways, stepping into the angle, placing his body between Ethan and the threat. His movement was precise, economical, no wasted energy. His growl rolled low and deep, not a threat to attack, but a command to stop. The brindled dog hesitated, momentum breaking. It snapped again, closer now, then faltered. Its eyes flicked to the handler behind it, searching for permission that didn't come. Max held. Ethan felt it then, the moment the balance tipped, not toward violence, but toward choice. Max was choosing restraint, choosing protection, choosing to be more than what they wanted to turn him into. "Get control of your dog," someone shouted. The handler cursed and moved forward, reaching for the leash. Too late. The leader stepped out of the SUV. He was taller than the others, broad-shouldered, posture straight despite the heavy coat. His hair was dark and cut short, his face angular with a scar that pulled one corner of his mouth down. He moved with an ease that came from confidence, not strength. When he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. He raised one hand, not to calm, but to signal. The handler froze. The leader's gaze found Ethan and held it. Recognition sparked there, sharp and immediate. Then his eyes dropped to Max. Appreciation flickered. Possession. He stepped closer, boots crunching on snow that glowed amber beneath the sinking sun. As he did, his sleeve rode up just enough to expose his wrist. Ethan saw the tattoo. It was small, dark, precise. A symbol etched deep into skin, a unit insignia Ethan had worn once, years ago, in another life. The memory hit him like cold water. Long nights, short orders. Men who believed the same words meant the same things. The leader saw the recognition and smiled again, slower this time. The brindled dog backed away, confused, leash reclaimed by the handler. The crowd murmured, tension breaking into nervous noise as parents pulled children close and a park officer began pushing through from the far end. Max didn't move. He stood between Ethan and the man with the tattoo, eyes bright as embers, unblinking. A warrior without medals, without orders, without need for either. The leader tilted his head, studying Max. "Good dog," he said softly, almost fond. "Shame." Ethan's hand tightened at his side. The man turned away before anything more could be said, melting back toward the SUV as sirens began to rise in the distance, not close enough to promise safety, but loud enough to suggest consequences. The vehicle rolled off, slow and deliberate, leaving tracks that cut through gold-lit snow. Ethan stayed where he was, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the place where the leader had stood. The past had found him, and it wasn't finished. Ethan chose patience over force, and it changed everything. The night after the park dissolved into questions and murmurs, he didn't chase the SUV or hunt the man with the tattoo. He went home, washed the snow from his boots, and laid the evidence out like a map that finally made sense. The torn strip of Navy working uniform rested beside the GPS collar on the table, winter light slipping through the blinds in thin bars. Max lay at his feet, awake but calm, head on his paws, eyes tracking Ethan's movements with steady trust. The city outside quieted into a careful sleep, unaware that the hinge of its story had shifted. By morning, Minneapolis glimmered as if scrubbed clean. Snow dusted the rooftops again, fresh and light, and the sun rose into it without apology. Ethan stood at the window for a moment, breathing in the cold brightness, then turned to work. He called Sarah Miller first. She arrived at the clinic early, hair pulled into its familiar low ponytail, her tall, slender frame wrapped in a white coat that looked almost luminous against the snow. Her skin was pale with winter, knuckles rough from gloves and antiseptic, and her eyes, soft gray-green, held a resolve sharpened by the night's fear. She didn't ask questions when Ethan requested copies of the medical records. She compiled them carefully. Photographs of scars around the rescued dog's muzzle, notes on chipped canines, measurements of weight loss, and timelines of healing that told the truth without embellishment. "These aren't accidents," she said quietly, sliding the folder across the counter. "They never were." She glanced at Max and softened. He knew when to stop. That matters. Ethan thanked her and moved on. Mike Thompson met him in a diner near the river, the kind of place where steam fogged the windows and coffee came in thick mugs. Mike looked older in the daylight, the deep lines at the corners of his eyes etched by years of restraint. His beard was trimmed closer now, his coat heavy, shoulders squared as if bracing against more than the cold. He had slept little. It showed in the tightness of his jaw and the way his fingers tapped the table as he spoke. "I reach the right people," Mike said, keeping his voice low. "Not the ones who posture, the ones who move." He slid a phone across the table, its screen filled with timestamps and addresses. "Public cameras, transit feeds, license plate readers, we stitch it together. It sings." By noon, the song was loud enough to hear. Footage from the park showed the handler's release, the leader's arrival, the precise moment the tattoo flashed into view. Another camera caught the SUV leaving. Its path mirrored later near the warehouse district. The GPS collar signal, disabled but not erased, left a faint digital fingerprint that overlapped with the warehouse perimeter. It wasn't proof alone. It was proof in chorus. The call went out as the sun climbed higher. Sirens didn't scream. They converged. Vehicles moved with purpose, unmarked and patient, sliding through snow-bright streets toward the industrial outskirts. Ethan didn't ride along. He watched from the clinic's side lot with Sarah and Mike, Max seated at his heel, posture relaxed but attentive. When the radio crackled with confirmations, perimeter secured, entry teams in place, Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. The warehouse yielded without drama. Doors opened, lights flooded in, men were taken aside, hands raised, faces blank with the surprise of being seen. Inside, cages were unlatched carefully, chains cut and coiled away. Dogs emerged into light that didn't burn them. Some trembled, some stared. One after another, they were wrapped in blankets and guided toward warmth. The rescued German shepherd, the one who had limped into the bus stop and started all of this, was carried out last, eyes bright with a disbelief that slowly became relief. When it was over, snow began again, a gentle fall that softened the edges of everything. The city exhaled. Ethan knelt in the clinic lot, the cold seeping through his pants, and placed his hand on Max's head. Max leaned into the touch, his breath releasing in a long, quiet sigh that sounded like winter leaving a room. The growl was gone. The vigilance eased into watchfulness without weight. Sarah stood beside them, hands tucked into her coat, a smile breaking through the seriousness she wore like armor. "He's not just a dog," she said, voice warm. "He's home." Later, as dawn edged toward full morning, Ethan walked the snowy streets with Max at his side. The light had changed again, less glare, more promise. Families stepped out with thermoses and laughter. A bus hissed to a stop. Somewhere, a bell chimed. Ethan still wore his Navy working uniform, the digital camouflage continuous and unbroken, a reminder of discipline without demand. He accepted the call from the department when it came, not with triumph, but with clarity. He agreed to serve as temporary caretaker for the rescued dogs, to help them relearn quiet, to bridge fear into trust. It felt right. It felt earned. They moved forward together, Ethan and Max, footprints darkening the silvered snow as the sun climbed behind them. The city opened. The past loosened its grip. And for the first time in a long while, the road ahead didn't feel like a test. It felt like a beginning. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, on 4 tired legs in the middle of winter when hope feels far away. This story reminds us that when the world grows cold, God often works through loyalty, courage, and compassion. Through a man who chose truth instead of violence. Through a dog who chose protection instead of fear. Through light that always finds a way to return, even after the longest night. In our own lives, we may not face snowstorms or dark warehouses, but we all carry unseen battles, moments when we feel watched, tested, or alone. And yet Scripture tells us, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. If this story touched your heart, let it be a reminder you are not forgotten. Your kindness matters, and even when you cannot see the path ahead, God is already preparing the dawn. Please take a moment to share this story with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every one. And if you believe in stories of faith, loyalty, and second chances, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. May God bless you and your family. May He protect you through every season of life. And may the light always find you, especially when the world feels cold. Amen.